Well, collectors, we're at home, I guess, like everybody else. So I thought maybe I could entertain you a little bit with talking about first model Luftwaffes, second model Luftwaffes, and Luftwaffe swords. I know it's a subject that a lot of you already know quite a bit about, but maybe there'll be a couple of tidbits here and there that you might learn something or at least get a kick out of it. But hey, it's something to do while you're all hunkered down anyhow, right? So here we go. Before I get started, in my last semi-educational seminar I did, I got a lot of people that wrote in about my cufflinks. And what I've done over the years, I've always, when I found period cufflinks, I always bought them, and I enjoy wearing them to shows. And I thought also I may as well wear period cufflinks for these seminars also. So I'd show you, since we're doing the Luftwaffe, you can see a set here that have a nice Luftwaffe motif. That's on the one side, and then on the other side of the cufflinks they actually have a propeller. Pretty neat, huh? It kind of gets you into the mood. So what we're going to do, we'll start out first with the DLV, which of course came before the Luftwaffe, and this organization was primarily formed to experiment with glider pilots and that kind of thing, but they were also running a lot of motorized aircraft, which was illegal according to the Versailles Treaty, but they made on that they were just clubs and so forth. So airplanes were being developed then, and we're talking about the period of 1933 when Hitler first came to power. So I thought I would start with one of the rarest things. This sword comes from my personal collection, and it's not a Luftwaffe sword, which you probably thought just looking at it. It's a DLV sword, and it's different from Luftwaffe swords in a lot of ways. The first thing you might notice is that the sun wheels here on both the pommel and the crossguard are actually inlaid. The metal was cut out so that the gilded swastikas could be inlaid into the surface to meet flush, and it's that way on both sides of the sword. And the way the pommel and the hilt itself was held together was a nut on the top. You see that nut? The normal swords, they just screw off from the pommel. And another thing that's different about the DLV sword is that it has 13 grip ribs, whereas a normal Luftwaffe sword has only 10. In fact, I can hold one up here next to it so you can easily see the difference in the grip, and also see the difference in the swastikas. Okay, and then also another difference is the fact that the sword scabbard is made of a composition material. There's no metal in it, and the mounts are the nickel silver type, and they're held together with staples. And this particular blade, it must have had a normal type of hanger on it. This particular blade is in mint condition, and it's produced by the Wiersberg firm. I think you can see that trademark. And as far as I know, other than this example I own myself and another one that's owned in a collection in England, I know of no others that exist. And I thought I would show you something here that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. This is Hermann Goering with a DLV uniform on, and if you look real close at the picture, you can see that little nut on the top of the pommel, and you can also see that the sun wheels are inlaid, and also that the grip has 13 ribs, not the usual type. And as I say, he appears to be wearing a regular crescent type hanger with it. It's always nice when you can find period pictures of things, because it really proves the existence. Yeah, no, you can't say, oh, some guy made that. Well, there it is. So that was the DLV sword, and then shortly after that, or at the same time, the DLV also wore officer daggers. Now, in the case of this particular example, this one is a DLV officer, but it's been cut down. It was approximately this long, and when the first model Luftwaffes came out, they decided that these DLV officer pieces were too cumbersome, so they made them into what are first model Luftwaffes. Here you can see the actual length on a blade of one. They were 55 centimeters. And the things about these DLV pieces too, they also have the inlaid sun wheels, just like that sword. Same thing. The grips have more ribs on them, and also the scabbard is a composition material, so the fittings were held by staples. It has a standard nickel chain, except for the fact that the chain was hooked to the hanging rings with an S fitting here. See how that fitting is an S? And sometimes you'll see other really early Luftwaffe first models with that S thing. Sometimes the clips will be a little different. This one is pretty much the same. I have another one here. Let's take a look at this one. Here we have again the S fitting there, the inlaid sun wheels, and this clip is a little different than you normally see. If you look close, you can see that it's DRGM marked with a patent number at the bottom. And that's not something that you would see on a normal first model Luftwaffe. As far as who made these, there were a lot of different makers. This one, I don't see any. Oh yeah, this one is Paul Weiersberg. And let's see who this other one was. This one has no maker on it, but also look at the ricasso and how the shoulders are made, which is different than first model Luftwaffes. So if you're going to have a complete Luftwaffe collection, if you can get a DLV officer, it's a great thing to have. And they're quite valuable, as you guys know. We don't see too many of them, and they're always fun to have in your collection. So then after that period, then in 1935, they introduced the first model Luftwaffe, which this is an early example. It's the same as a normal first model Luftwaffe, with the exception that, again, it did not have a steel scabbard. It has staples that hold the fittings in. The sun wheels, though, are different. What they did on first model Luftwaffes, and maybe I can show you more on another Dagger. This is a beauty here. This particular piece, if you look at it, you can see the swastika gilt is still there, which is very rare to see. They used a brass piece, but normally the gilt wore off real quick. And it was actually a medallion which was silver plated, and then the sun wheel gilded over the silver plating. And most of the time when we see these, the silvering between the sun wheels has worn off. That's the case on the crossguard sun wheels too. So if you can find one that still has all the silvering between the legs of the sun wheels, that's a very good thing. On this one that I showed you at first, it still has some of the silvering, but you can see where it's worn in those areas. So that's, if you're collecting first lufts, like any other daggers, you want to get the best condition you can possibly find. And this one is just magnificent. The silvered, the mounts were silvered over top of nickel, but the silvering is still all there, so it's patinaed to almost a beautiful black color. And then the type of porta-pee that was worn on these daggers, it was the 23 centimeter, but it was tied differently than we see on the later second models. If you look on the back of it, see how it's twisted in kind of like an X? That's the proper tie for the first model porta-pee. So even though it's the same, the tie makes a difference. And then the chains on the real early ones also had silver plating over the nickel. This particular piece, the leather, it's all Moroccan leather, is in beautiful condition, and the blade is spectacular, just like the outside. And on the reverse, it's made by Icorn with a 3541 trademark. Probably that trademark though goes back to 35 or 36. And then with the Moroccan grip leather, the base was wood that was carved out and covered with Moroccan. And in the case of Icorn, they like to use 3 pieces of wire. The wire was silvered also, and the center wire was twisted to give it some effect. And when they're new, like this one is, it just really, well, it's not new, but it looks new. It just gives it such a beautiful effect. And I personally think that first model Luftwaffes, I mean, just look at that. They're almost medieval looking. Such beautiful, beautiful things. So you can imagine when the Luftwaffe guys started strutting around with these, the Army and everybody else, hey, we'd like to have something too. So this is what you see with them. Then as time went on, about 37, 38, they adopted aluminum instead of nickel silver. Not really that it was cheaper to make, but aluminum was lightweight and it was considered a pretty neat discovery because you didn't see aluminum much in those days. And the pieces that were made with aluminum, usually they'll be Horster, SMF, Icorn, Wiresburg also. They gilded the swastikas, which were part of the casting of the pommel and the crossguard. And in the case of those 4 manufacturers, the gilt really held up well. It really looks good. This one is made by E&F Horster. Now the scabbards, of course, were metal with matching aluminum mounts and aluminum chains. And the grip was wood again and covered with Moroccan, and usually they had triple wrap, but later on they start to not, you don't see that as much. So it went from there, and then the later pieces, this is an example of a later piece. They stopped putting the medallions in like they did on the early ones, and these sun wheels were built into the cast of the crossguard and the pommel, and they were made out of pot metal. So the sun wheels were gilded, but because of the lousy material, it's very hard to find one that still has any gilt left. And you can tell one of these mid-period to later pieces because the butt plate is fatter than a normal piece. See, if you look at an early piece, can you see the difference in the size of that butt plate? And that's a good way to identify a later period Luftwaffe. Plus, they just don't have the pizzazz that the early ones do, but they are what they are. Now, as far as wearing these daggers, it's very important to know that up until 1937, the early part of 1937, only Luftwaffe officers wore this model dagger. NCOs did not wear anything up to that point. Then in 1937, when the second model officer dagger was introduced, it was worn by officers and some enlisted men, which I'll show you. But the first model Luftwaffe then was made for NCOs, for wear by high NCOs. Officers no longer wore the first model dagger. And I can show you some of that in some photographs that tends to prove what I'm talking to you about. For instance, here's a picture here. This must have been taken in real early 1937, because when you look at the picture, the officer all the way over on the right, he's wearing a DLV dagger, and the other officers are still wearing the so-called first model. This man's wearing a sword, and the guy at the front here looks like he's wearing a second model dagger. So it must have been just at the changeover period, perhaps. Now, we look at this picture here. There's a first model dagger being worn, but you'll see that the man, by his cap cords and his shoulder boards, he was a lieutenant. So he was an officer at the time. So this picture was taken prior to 1937. Here's another picture taken after 1937, where this NCO, it's probably an airplane crew, he may have been the pilot or whatever, he's wearing a first model Luftwaffe, but he's not an officer, so we know that this is after 1937. Here's a guy loving it up with his honey here, but it is a great picture of a first model. And as you can see, he is an NCO, not an officer. They've also made first model Luftwaffe daggers with presentation blades. This particular piece is on the cover of my Luftwaffe book, and it was given to a bandmaster. And it's just an outstanding piece with blue backgrounds and gold oak leaves. And a Luft Eagle in the panel in the center in gold. Beautiful stuff. There you can get a better idea of the blue and the gold, and then it also has engraved fittings on it. Notice too, as I was saying about the silvering around the sun wheels, see it's all there? That's a sign of a really good condition dagger that hasn't been worn. Now we get to this example. Here you'll see a pretty clear difference here. Notice the second model officer dagger is being worn by an officer, and the NCO dagger is worn by an NCO. There you can see the comparison. This picture, the man on the right, they're both NCOs, is wearing a second model officer dagger. And the reason for that, and the other fellow is wearing a first model, but the reason for that was, if you look on his collar tabs, you could see he was a Oberfeldwebel. So in certain cases, these kind of guys were entitled to wear the officer dagger, and he also has a pilot badge. There's a great shot of an officer dagger with portapee being worn by a high-end CO. See the three birds on his collar? And then in some cases you'll find daggers that have unit marks and personalization. See, that's a unit mark of a Luftwaffe regiment. Guy looking through a telescope. And then on some of the real early daggers, initial production examples, you'll see markings on sometimes on the ends of the crossguard. That one has a Waffen amp with a 96, and this one is marked on one side of the crossguard. So that's kind of what we see with first models, and I'll show you second models next. I hope you found that of interest. There's nothing earth-shaking there, but maybe there's some things that some collectors don't know. So we'll take a break for a minute, and then we'll go to the second models. All right, before I leave the first model Luftwaffe swords, I thought I should also mention that although they're extremely rare, every once in a while you do see a first model officer that has a factory etched blade. And I thought I would show you this one because it's really spectacular. You can see the condition is really good. The silvering is still mostly in with the sun wheels, beautiful grip and beautiful leather. But this blade is really worth a look. It's just a beautiful thing. You see it right on the camera there. It's got the same motif as we see on the second Lufts pretty much, but it's really beautiful. Still has the laurel leaves under the wings of the eagle, but the eagle's bigger. And then on the reverse of the piece, it has fine floral etching. And this particular example was made by Robert Klass. Robert Klass made some great things. They really did. And this is one of the best first looks that I've ever seen. Just fabulous. And then also, I'll show you, I forgot to show you the swords. I talked about the DLV, but I didn't talk about the standard Luft. This is a standard early first model Luftwaffe. Nice Moroccan leather on the grip and the scabbard. Nickel silver fittings. Has the silvering. The same applies on swords. If the silvering is all gone between the legs of the sun wheels, it's not in as good a condition as one with it. And then they come with this crescent hanger. You're all probably pretty familiar with that. And this particular example happens to be an original Damascus piece that's maker stamped on the tang. It was an option. I would think only really wealthy guys could afford it, so we don't see it very much. But this is a very beautiful example. And then after the 37-38 period, like the Dagger, the factories also made mostly SMF, Eichhorn, Horster, aluminum fitted daggers, and they had the gilded sun wheels where the gilt was really done well and held up very well. Some of the lesser brands, the gilding didn't hold up as well. I'm not sure who made this piece. Let's take a look here. Oh yeah, this is an Eichhorn. You can usually tell the Eichhorn fittings from other fittings too on these swords. They're a little more rounded where they curve onto the edge. And like I say, normally the gilding holds up well. So that's what we see in swords, and I'll just show you so that you know I'm not woofing you. They actually wore them. There's a nice picture of an officer with a early Luftwaffe sword. So now we'll go to second model Luftwaffe Daggers, and we'll be right with you. All right, now we're going to look at some second model Luftwaffes. You know, to most people, they probably look pretty much the same, but there are a lot of little idiosyncrasies that certain makers had. And if you get used to looking at that and studying the idiosyncrasies, sometimes you can identify a dagger without looking at the blade trademark. And a lot of this information is all available in my Luftwaffe book. And if you don't have that, it's a great thing to have. It's $70 and it covers all this stuff, and I guarantee you you'll learn a lot. But with second model Luftwaffes, as I said earlier, they were introduced, I think it was in March of 1937, and they were called the Officer Dagger. And a lot of collectors, everybody wants gilded swastikas on their Luftwaffe. Unfortunately, the majority of the makers very lightly gilded the swastika, if at all, so that it didn't hold up very well, except for the three people, Eichhorn, SMF, and Wiersberg. Usually when you see those makers, the gild on the swastika is really normally pretty good. Sometimes it's worn off also, but those are the kind that if you like that, look for that. And I'll show you what I mean. This is an Eichhorn piece. It's quite beautiful. The original gilt is still on the swastikas on both sides. You know, and that's really, it's hard to find one with that much gilt on it. And also Eichhorn, they made their daggers with a yellow grip, which turned orange over the years. If you have an Eichhorn dagger with a white grip, I'm sorry to tell you, somebody changed the grip, because Eichhorn did not use white grips. And that's also true with SMF. Other features with Eichhorn, the bands in the scabbard are more rounded than you see on anyone else's scabbard. So if you have an Eichhorn dagger, you would want your scabbard to be Eichhorn also, right? And when I mentioned some of the idiosyncrasies, well, first, before I do that, I'll show you that this is an example of a Wiersberg. And here again, the nice orange grip, but the gilt a lot of times did last on these pieces. See that, how it is? And the same is true of the SMF. See there, that's the SMF. So the gilt still on it. But one of the things that you might be able to notice fairly easily, the Eichhorn dagger is on your left, and we call the Eichhorn pommel a heart-shaped. Can you see how it is kind of heart-shaped compared to the Wiersberg on the right? Again, if you have an Eichhorn dagger, don't you want the pommel to be heart-shaped? So if you get used to looking at them, you'll be able to see that kind of stuff. And then again, remember I said there was a difference in the Eichhorn bands. Look, you can, whoop, this one's loose here. That happens a lot. They're rounded, more rounded than the ones on the Wiersberg. And the SMF type, they only used aluminum bands, and they stick out like a sore thumb against the airplane gray of the scabbard. So you want to see that too. And all three of these producers, with the tops of their cross guards, I hope you can see it, they have engraved panels with oak leaves and acorns. Each one of them had engraved panels, but if you look at them closely, you can see the engraving is all different because they had their own templates. So again, this is all in my Luftwaffe book, but this is, again, you want to see the right engraving on your Eichhorn crossguard, or else maybe somebody switched it. So it's a valuable thing to know, along with the scabbard. It's worth noting too that a lot of Eichhorns, not all of them, I got to put some crazy glue on that and get that back in there. That happens, you know, over years they were only lightly soldered. You see that a lot with Army daggers too. The blades on some of the early ones were nickel plated. This example is a polished piece, and it has an Eichhorn trademark that's stamped, and it's smaller than what you normally see. And that was only done in 1940. So we know that this dagger comes from 1940. That's when they used that small stamped trademark. It wasn't etched. On the Wiresburg, a lot of times, Wiresburg almost always plated their blades. Nickel plated, it's not polished, so they'll usually have a brighter finish to them. A lot of times you'll see a Waffen amp on Wiresburgs also. And that same thing is true of SMFs. This is an SMF. You see, can you see that Waffen amp above the trademark there? I never saw an SMF that didn't have a Waffen amp. Okay, now I showed you the tops of the cross guards, but I'll just compare with you. These are two other makers. This one is Anton Wingen, and this one is WKC. Now again, if you look at the top of the cross guards, notice they're not engraved. The oak leaves are part of the casting. But also look and see that the castings are slightly different in that this leaf, the second leaf up, overlaps, and on the second leaf on the other one, it overlaps in the opposite direction. The one here is what we call a generic crossguard. It's made by Anton Wingen, not the crossguard, but the Dagger. And they didn't make their own fittings, so they ordered them from companies that did specialize in making fittings, and that's why we call them generic. So you'll see a lot of Luftwaffe daggers that have generic type crossguards, and an easy way to tell a generic without even looking it up is the fact that the edge of the top of the wings is more heavily outstretched or cantilevered than other guards. Maybe you can see that here. See the extra? See how it's done? And then on the reverse of the generic type, the pebbling is bigger than it is on other daggers. See that? Yeah, it's all little stuff, but it can be very important because you know whether you have an authentic dagger or not when you know about these things. And also something worth noting, when we see white grip daggers like this, usually they were made after the war started. White grips were not that popular on Luftwaffe daggers prior to the war. So they're usually wartime pieces, and they made thousands and thousands of them. A lot of them are unmarked because they were ordered directly from 6 or 7 different factories on a contract from the Luftwaffe. And in this one you see the 23 centimeter porta-pie, and that's the proper tie for the second model. And then also with these daggers, every once in a while you'll find one that's got the man's name on it. I hope you can see that. It's hard to see the engraving on these Luftwaffes because the pebbling interferes with the letters. But you know, many's a time one of these names turns out to be a German Cross winner or a Knight's Cross winner. You never know. So it's worth looking into it and contact some of these guys that do research, and they can make you a very happy guy sometimes, and it's not expensive at all, $100 or $200, and if you can research your Dagger, what a great thing that is. And then the Daggers were worn from hangers. These are a couple of sets. These are both kind of deluxe. The piece on the left has leather tops on it that hold the straps, and both types have what we call the extra quality hardware with push-up type snaps. They also came with push-in snaps that were pebbled, and they also came with top clips that were plain and so forth. So you'll see quite a lot of variation with the hangers. And on the reverse, they all had a nice gray velvet, and you can tell how much wear the Daggers had usually by the condition of the velvet on the back. These two hangers are in great condition, and I was lucky I was able to find the belt loops for them too, which are kind of rare, but really makes for a nice package. And then there were other things too that you guys have probably heard of, these Luftwaffe Daggers with black grips, and you go, oh God, what is that? Well, the collecting community never knew what they were either, and dealers in the past knew that they couldn't sell something if they couldn't explain what it actually is. So all of a sudden the black was a sign it was a funeral dagger, and for some reason the collecting community accepted that. I always found it hard to believe that anybody would buy a Dagger just to go to a funeral. But then again, maybe if you were a funeral director, it might have been worth the purchase, but for normal usage, it made no sense. So what these are, we've always found, by the way, that originals were produced by the Robert class firm. The originals all have this nice black celluloid grip, usually with aluminum wire, and the fittings are normally generic. See that with the cast-in top leaves. But what happened here, we find the same thing with Army Daggers with black grips. The Armies, the collecting community called them, what the heck did they call them? I forget now, but they're first model railway Daggers. There's no such thing as a first model railway Dagger. No catalog has a model for a first model railway Dagger. And even Eichhorn, their railway Dagger is called a railway police Dagger. It's not called a second model, it's a railway police Dagger, and it's not like these at all. But what happened, apparently some sharp salesman or whatever walked into class and had a lot of black celluloid that they didn't know what to do with, and class apparently bought it up cheaply, and they painted the grips white. It's as simple as that. Usually on these pieces, the second model as well as the first model railway, if you look real close, you'll see some signs of the old white paint still there someplace. So although they're really, during the period, weren't meant to be anything but a second model Luftwaffe Dagger, they still are a legitimate variation, so they carry a nice premium with the collecting community. So they're a good Dagger to have. And then, as with the first model Luftwaffe, there were also optional things that you could do. And in the case of this piece, this has an original ivory grip on it. Very beautiful. Most ivory, because it was alive at one time, it dries out and you'll find cracks. And if anything, they add beauty to the grips. And then the blades came with a beautiful etch. This is the standard Voos type etch. It has the eagle in the center with the laurel leaves underneath the wings. And then on the opposite side, it was all floral done. Very beautiful things, and these were also produced with no maker, with almost the identical etch. There's a little bit of difference in the amount of dots that are on the end of the etch. I show the different types of blades in my Luftwaffe book, but these are really beautiful, and most of them I think were made about 1939 or 1940. They're terrific daggers, and if you're an advanced collector, you really don't want to have a collection that doesn't have a Voos or at least an unmarked piece. Of course, there were blades that had dedications on them also that were custom ordered, and they're of course one of a kind, but we don't see them that often. So that gives you just a kind of an overview of the first and second model pieces along with the swords. And like I say, you probably didn't have anything to do anyhow, so you may as well have to listen to me, I guess. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll continue to do these little seminars on dagger types. I think we've done 4 or 5 of them now, and there's a lot more to go, and we get a lot of good email from collectors, and write me too. Let me know what you think. If you think it sucks, tell me. I like that too. If there's things that you thought I should have added, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I just do this all off the cuff, nothing written down, so there's probably a lot of stuff that I forgot because I just decided I was going to do this at lunchtime today. So this is the result, for better or worse. So I wish you all well. Please be safe. Good luck to you all.